Hello and welcome back to the virtual hangar. Today I'm going to show you how to make a washable replacement for your Swiffer duster. I've seen people make these before, but they seem to lack the fluffy layers that the normal Swiffer duster has. Either they're made out of fleece sewn together or they're crocheted or knitted, and I wanted to do something a little bit different that would hold up. So you'll definitely need just regular old yarn. This is the acrylic yarn. It's like Red Heart or something. I have a ton of it, as you can see, and it's usually the cheapest kind of yarn you can get at Michael's. You'll also need some scissors, much like these. These will be fine. A ruler. Yours doesn't have to be in centimeters. And then, as with most of my project, you will need a little bit of cardboard. So first, let's talk about the Swiffer duster. The handle is something we are going to be keeping for the whole project, so I'm just going to remove the duster head that comes with it, but we're going to try and emulate that. So the first thing we need to know is that it's about 1.5 inches across, and then when you go up, it's about 4.5 inches tall. So we're going to make a duster head that fits those measurements, and it's going to be made of a bunch of yarn pieces cut 6 inches long. So we're going to use some cardboard here. I'm going to square this edge so that we can measure out a bunch of yarn to be 6 inches long at once, and then just cut them all at once instead of cutting 6 inches over and over again. So I use this piece of cardboard to wrap my yarn around. So I'm just going to make a mark at 6 inches, which is also 15 centimeters, and then make a straight line. Like I said, doesn't have to be perfectly square, and then I go ahead and cut with scissors along this line. It really doesn't matter how wide this piece of cardboard is, I guess how long it is. You do want one edge to be 6.5 inches. We are going to use this to wrap our yarn around. So when we're wrapping our yarn, I just start with one end and line it up with the edge. And make sure as you're wrapping, you don't want to pull too hard. You don't want this yarn to get stretched out. So if you want to just rotate the cardboard in a circle like I'm doing, because it kind of looks better on camera, you can do that. But if you pull, just make sure you don't get carried away and make the tension so tight that you end up stretching out the yarn as you wrap around. You can see also that I am wrapping it pretty much flat. I don't want the yarn to cross itself that much because I do want them all mostly the same length. When you get to the one end of your cardboard as it fills up, you can just scooch them down to one side and then keep wrapping. So I'm going to wrap this as many times as I can possibly fit on the length of my cardboard, which is why it doesn't matter how wide it is, only that you have one edge that's 6 inches and the other edge doesn't matter. You could cut it with scissors if it's thinner, but you would have to cut more rounds of these. So it's up to you. Just going to keep wrapping and trim the edge here. And when you're done finally wrapping, you're just going to take your scissors, scoot all of your strands together, and kind of tuck the blade under there and cut all the way through. This is my favorite part, very oddly satisfying. Take them off of the cardboard and just lay them out flat. I'm combing through them a little bit with my fingers. They shouldn't be too tangled. And I'm just going to use my cardboard piece to find the midpoint here. Our goal is we're going to make a ton, about 600 according to my math, of these identically-ish lengthed strands of yarn, and these are going to be the fluffy kind of palm of our duster. So I find the middle, and I'm just taking my scissors and cutting through. Again, they don't have to be perfect. It's really not one of those projects where every single strand has to be identical in length. So you can see here, I've got a big pile of yarn, and now I'm just about ready to start. But first, I have to demonstrate a couple of knots. So I am going to take this purple strand so that you can see one way, and then I'm going to take some of this pink and go the other way. And I am going to demonstrate a simple overhand knot. So what you're going to do is take the pink, or you'll take your smaller strand, and you're going to wrap it around the purple strand. I'm going to use the purple for the mount for this project. And you can see I've got the purple going through the loop of these two ends of the pink. And then I'm just going to wrap both pink strands around itself. So you can see I cross up, and then I go through with two strands, and it looks once I pull the tails out and straighten them out. It looks basically like a little pretzel. It's just a basic overhand knot. For doing this project, you are going to want to pull the knot closer to the mount, the purple string. So you can do that. You just kind of pull one of the humps in the loop and then keep pulling on the tail until the knot closes finally pretty close to the mount. As you tie all of these knots, you're going to get so good at this. You do want it to be able to pretty much move freely up and down on the mount. You don't want to do it so close to the mount that you can't move it. So I am going to take this purple yarn and it's going to be the mount for my project. If you only have one color, that's fine. But I'm going to just tie an overhand knot to make a loop around the bottom of my Swiffer handle. That's going to make it a little bit easier for us to pull our replacement duster onto the handle when we're done. And it also just ties off the end so none of our knots slip off. So once I have tied that knot, it's time to start making our fringe for our duster. You are just going to take those 6-inch pieces of yarn and tie each one in an overhand knot on the mount here so that they can move freely. You do want the knot to be close to the mount again, but not so close that you can't move it. And you don't want them to be too hard to move because you don't want a ton of friction on this mount yarn. This is what I like to call a couch project. Cut a ton of these little 6-inch strands, keep them in a bowl or a bag by your couch on the coffee table, sit down and watch Netflix, and just tie knots around your mount. You are going to need a lot of these, and this is definitely the sort of project that most people would say is tedious or would maybe not be worth it. But if you think about it, I designed this project to be able to hold up to multiple washings. A lot of these I've seen will probably come apart after a couple. So maybe, yeah, it does take you a couple hours to tie all these knots like it did for me. But how many of these are you realistically going to make? And then how many of those boxes of Swiffer dusters are you now not going to have to buy because you have these ones that you can use over and over again and you're not going to have to replace after each use? That's also why I use the white, by the way, so that I can tell when I use them when they've gotten dirty. The dust will show up really well right against the white yarn, and I also have a ton of that yarn. But anyways, once you've tied a fair amount of those onto your mount, you are going to need 5 pieces of yarn, about a yard long each. That's 36 inches or 3 feet. So you'll need 5 of those to be the uprights. So I am going to count over 6 knots that we tied, so it's 12 fringes, but 6 strands that we tied, and I'm going to push them towards the loop that we made. That's the end. And you can see also I have that long tail. That's going to be important later. So I am going to take one of my long strands and tie a simple overhand knot. It's the first step of tying your shoe, and that's as far as I'm going to go around my purple mount. And then I'm going to count 6 more and tie another pink strand, that long strand. Again, just a single overhand knot. It doesn't have to be especially secure. It's going to get woven in. We do this 3 more times. We're going to have a total of 5. And those strands are what we're going to use to connect each row of fringe around our Swiffer handle. So again, just a simple overhand knot every 6 knots of fringe. It's going to be a little bit confusing, and it honestly doesn't have to be perfect. Nobody's going to count and check your weaving, but your first row should be about 3 inches long once you get them all tightened up together and pushed towards the end. So we are going to be weaving this around itself with these pink strands going up, and that's going to be pretty hard to do unless we have something to weave around. So we are going to build a simple jig, and what that means is it's just a setup that helps us achieve a goal, and it's temporary. So to make this jig, we're going to use a toilet paper roll, which I'm sure everybody has, and just cut it straight up the middle. And then I'm going to cut around the bottom about 1/2 inch up from the bottom and about 1/2 inch apart. I'm going to roll this thing around itself so that it's about doubled over as we roll. And then once I've got it about the thickness I want, the doubled over is a pretty good metric for the handle of the Swiffer duster, but it just depends on, I guess, the toilet paper you buy. But once you have it rolled up, you're going to use a hot glue gun just like this one, or I guess you could use white glue and clamp it, but I don't like to wait for things, so I love hot glue. I just put a little bit on the end of the flap here, not so close so that I burn my finger, but I do make sure the top is flat and that this lip just holds close, because we just want a cylinder that will stick up from our base. So I am going to fold these cuts down we made, and these are going to work like little tabs we can attach glue to, so that we can basically make this tube stick straight up from whatever surface we decide to glue it to. So I took another square of cardboard, and I'm just putting some hot glue on the bottom of the tabs, and I'm just going to slap it right onto a piece of cardboard. Just something sturdy enough that, you know, I'm not going to blow it off the couch if I breathe on it too hard. And I just use a little bit more hot glue on the other tabs just so they don't get stuck in the yarn as I'm weaving. So I've got my end there with the loop, and I wrap my first row around. But before we're ready to really get going on this, I have to show you a few more knots. So most people know how to tie their shoes. This is called a half knot. You just cross one over the other. And this is step one for tying your shoes. If you were to tie this in a double knot and you did the same exact overhand knot again, this is actually called a granny knot, and it's not secure at all, so we don't want any of those in our project. So again, left over right, and then left over right again is going to be the incorrect knot you want to use. That's the granny knot. What we actually want to use to secure two pieces of string is the square knot. So to do that, you're going to start the same way, do a half knot, left over right, and then actually what you're going to do is do right over left. If you don't know the difference, practice a couple times on some loose yarn, watch this part over again, but that is the knot we're actually going to use to secure the end of our piece here. So I, again, wrap the first row around our jig, and then I'm going to take that long tail that we made when we made the loop, and I'm going to tie that to one of the strings of the last upright that we tied to our mount. So I'm just going to use a square knot, and it's upside down here, so I would wait until you're very comfortable making the square knot. Don't try and do, left hand, right hand, whatever, but tie that with a square knot. Once you have that knot tied, go ahead and secure the loop and tail of your mount to the base of your jig here, just to get them out of the way. You're going to have a lot of strings going on and you don't want to get confused. So now we just go around and weave up. I'm going to count out 6 more knots each time, and I'm just going to push them tight to the end, the last half knot I made, before I take the next pink upright and tie it in a half knot around the mount. So you can see I've got the purple string between the 2 strands of pink, and I just tie them in a half knot. You want to pull the 2 pink strands tight enough so that this row of knots is flush to the top of the next row of knots, but not overly tight. It's more important to keep pulling on your mount string, the purple string, to make sure there's no slack between it and the tube that makes up your jig. Yours might turn out a little bit different, but it ends up being about 5 rows around per inch, for about 20 rows total that I go around, and I just do 6 of those fringes in between each upright of half knots, and I go all the way around over and over again until I am all the way up on the jig. And again, so if you did 5 knots in between each upright, it wouldn't be the end of the world. If you didn't tie them so tightly, it also wouldn't be the end of the world. There just wouldn't be as much fringe around the entire replacement as there would be if you did it tighter. So here I got to the end of the jig, and I'm going to carefully pull it off. And if you're having some difficulty doing that, don't forget to remove the tape that you put on the base of the tail and the loop, and that will help you get it off of the jig that you made. So once you've got that tape removed and you're at the top of your toilet paper roll, you can go ahead and pull it off. And I'm going to show you really fast what it looks like inside. You can see how the weaving looks, and maybe that will give you a better idea of the method. But once you're out of room on your toilet paper roll, go ahead and just stick the Swiffer handle right through that hole you made. Basically, you weaved around, and then you can just weave the rest of the way up to the end of the Swiffer handle. It has that little snap that lets it fold, and that can kind of help, or you can squeeze it between your legs as you keep going around. Every inch or so, I would do an overhand knot on the pink rows instead of the half knot, and that would kind of secure the distribution of rows. And I did that the whole way up, even when we were still on the cardboard. So if you find it starts getting a little bit irritating to keep those half knots from getting too loose, just throw an overhand on instead, and it'll keep it nice and secure. So when we get to the last one, finally, I have made it to the end of my Swiffer handle. Again, I did not count, I just kind of made it up. I will tie those in a half knot and then just trim the end of the mount off. Here, once I've got them trimmed, I take all 3 of them, I pull them nice and tight, and tie them in an overhand knot. That's going to secure the end of our mount and our upright on that upright. I didn't measure my mount ahead of time. I just left it on the yarn ball I had, but it ended up, by my calculations, you should be good if your mount is about 5 yards long, and then each upright is 1 yard, so 10 yards altogether. And then I'm just going around to the rest of my uprights and tying an overhand knot on the end of them to secure those ends. Give it maybe 2 if you're feeling, anxious. And then the last thing I do is to just close the gap across the end of my handle. I am taking whichever 2 kind of end up there happen to be the one of my mount. I just cross them into a square knot, and then I trim all the ends and give it a good fluff. And there is my Swiffer duster. You can trim it as needed, but it should be totally safe to put in your washing machine. So as always, if you made this project, I would love to see it, and I will see you guys next time.